We have lots to discuss here in today's video, including some NHL trade rumors around a variety of teams, including the Montreal Canadiens, Vancouver Canucks, as well as a lot of names involved between the St. Louis Blues and the Nashville Predators. It sure seems like both teams are potentially lining up to have fire sales as the year goes along, but what names are in play and who's getting the most attention early on here? Plus, we have the 3 stars of the week since it's Monday. We had a little bit of a trade earlier between the Flyers and the Senators to discuss. We have waiver wire activity with some interesting comments from Elliotte Friedman on a possible claim. An update on Jack Hughes, some further information given, a variety of NHL roster moves and injury updates as well coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to discuss in today's video. Seeing that it's Monday, we'll kick things off with the news of the 3 stars of the week, which NHL does every Monday. This past week's 3 stars, star number 1, Jason Robertson, who was absolutely on a tear last week for the Dallas Stars. In 3 games, put up 6 goals and 3 assists. He was absolutely on fire, averaging 3 points per game. Huge week for Robo. He gets first star honors. Alex DeBrincat of the Red Wings gets second star honors, putting up 5 goals and 1 assist, and also in 3 games. And Quinn Hughes is the 3rd star of the week of the Vancouver Canucks. He's missed time recently, only appeared in 2 games. In those games, he picked up 7 assists. So he's obviously that much of an impact player and difference maker for his club. So those are your 3 stars of the week. As I mentioned, we had a bit of a trade earlier, not a huge one, but a trade nonetheless. There is a video on the channel discussing the deal, more of a depth move for both franchises, but we did see the Flyers and the Sens hook up on a deal with the Flyers sending veteran Dennis Gilbert to the Ottawa Senators in exchange for RFA unsigned right shot defenseman Max Gannett. So Gilbert, of course, this will be his second tour of duty with the Senators. He's, of course, played for a few teams now, but last year he was with the Buffalo Sabres, which would be his hometown team from that area, but ultimately included in the big trade that the Sens and Sabres pulled off involving Dylan Cousins and Josh Norris. So Gilbert was a part of that, going to Ottawa with Cousins. And then at the end of the year, he was a free agent. I think there was a little bit of interest to bring him back, but ultimately he was going to be lower on the depth chart than he probably wanted to be. Signed in Philly, which appeared to be a better opportunity. Didn't really work out that way. He has not played in the NHL this year for the Flyers, appearing in only the American Hockey League so far in 6 contests. So at this point, I think Gilbert would welcome an opportunity to get back to the NHL. The Sens have some injuries on the blue line right now, so he'll get more of a chance to play in the short term. Once they get healthy, he's probably going to end up being the possibly like a 7-8 guy. So I'm not sure if he'll end up on waivers again or not. We'll see what happens. But Dennis Gilbert is a player that is going to be useful for Ottawa short term. Long term, it's difficult to say. But he will help them out on this big road trip they have coming up for the next week or 2 while they wait on Thomas Chabot to recover. Max Gannett goes to the Philadelphia Flyers, an unsigned RFA right shot D. Right shot D are hard to come by, but unfortunately, I guess for Ottawa, they have a lot of depth in that area. So, of course, this past offseason, as I said in the video earlier, you've already got the veterans there, Zub and Jensen. Then, of course, they drafted Carter Yakimchuk not long ago, first-round pick, so he's, projected to be a part of that at some point. They had signed Matt and Paolo, who came over from Europe a couple of years back. He's worked his way into a regular role. They've traded for Jordan Spence this summer. So, he kind of get boxed out of a path. Plus, they brought back Lassie Thompson, right? So, Lassie Thompson was a former right shot D of the Sens, went to Europe for a while and then came back. So, there's just too many guys for him to leapfrog over for an NHL opportunity. So, he didn't even sign his contract. They mutually agreed it was probably best for him to move on, and they were trying to find an opportunity. Now they needed a left shot D, and this works out for both sides. So, not a major move, but a depth option for both clubs. As I mentioned, waiver wire activity. The Boston Bruins today placed young centerman Johnny Beecher on waivers. He's only appeared in 6 games this year. He's got 1 goal, no assist in 25-26 season so far. He's a 6'3" left shot center, former high pick. Hasn't quite worked out to be the player that they'd hoped to be, but for the most part had a bottom 6 role when he has played. Pretty good wheels on Beecher, good skater. So there is some talk, though, with a good-sized centerman, inexpensive contract, that he could get picked up. Now, Elliotte Friedman had made some comments earlier regarding the Montreal Canadiens, saying that the Habs had definitely were looking for help down the middle with all their injuries, with Doc being out and New Hook being out. They're both guys who can play center, and then they have other injuries too, not other positions, including Laine on the wing and Gouli on the back end. But they were in on David Kampf, and they didn't get him. He ended up signing in Vancouver. Obviously, he saw a better opportunity there. I'm not sure what the offer was either, but they did try. They were very much in the mix there. So this might be another way for them to get a similar type of setting. Now, Kampf is probably, I think you could argue, a little stronger defensively than Beecher, but at the same time, like I said, he's got the size, he's got the mobility, he's got the skating. What's the worst that can happen, right? You take a flyer on the guy, you give him a shot. If he works out, great. If he doesn't, so be it. I mean, it's low risk. You can put him back on waivers. You can go to the minors, like whatever, right? I mean, they got Joe Veleno. To be honest, isn't doing much. I mean, maybe he's an upgrade on him. It's hard to say, right? Like, but they're definitely in that market. Now, I think Montreal would maybe consider a trade for a higher quality center, somebody who can play higher in the lineup. But as we've mentioned before, with all the injuries and what have you, like, they have to be thinking long term, right? So I don't know. I mean, they have lots of assets when it comes to prospects and draft capital and all that type of stuff. If they want to pull off a move, they could. But right now, it's a little bit challenging just because there's still a lot of teams that are deciding right now, are they going to be selling off assets or not? It's still early, right? That's why you're hearing about teams like the Preds and the Blues that we're going to talk about. They're kind of in a different circumstance, but a lot of other teams are just not at that point yet. So we'll see. Beecher might be a fit for the Montreal Canadiens. Maybe they decide not to go down that road, but Elliotte Friedman has mentioned that he thinks they may look to do that. We will see. Elliotte also had some other updates today on his from his podcast on Jack Hughes. Now, basically, we know what happened with Jack. We've heard the freak accident at a team dinner where he slipped and fell on some broken glass, sliced a finger, needed surgery, out for about 2 months. Well, Elliotte said when he was first got wind of this situation before the news broke, the initial fears from the team was that it was significantly worse. There were some people connected to the Devils telling him that they were worried that his season might be over and that it might be a much more serious injury. So obviously the surgery proved to be not as, once they get in there, not as bad as they had feared. Obviously, the team might feel like they kind of dodged a bullet here. Like I said, he's expected to be back ahead of time for the Olympics. If Team USA still wants to have him on their roster, it shouldn't be a problem unless there's some other unforeseen circumstance. But yeah, there was a lot of concern about Jack Hughes in the very early stages of that situation before it was announced. That Elliotte says that there was some concern that his season could be over. You imagine that, the terrible luck and injuries and stuff that he's had over the years, for that to end his season like that would be incredible. Thankfully, for their sake, it was not to be. Now, a bunch of other roster moves around the NHL here today. The Canucks returned Victor Mancini back to the American Hockey League. The Dallas Stars made a couple of moves as well, adding Matt Duchene to LTIR, retroactive to October 18th. Good news there is that he'd almost be ready to come off. So even if he's ready here short term, it's fine, because that's why they retroactively dated to when the injury happened. You have to obviously miss 10 games in 28 days. That's pretty much there. So it's really a short-term cap move, depending on when his return estimation is. Adam Ernie, also a Dallas Star who's been injured for a while, added to LTIR as well, retroactive to November the 11th. So he's going to obviously be out a bit longer from the time being. The Lightning today returned Boris Kachuk back to the American Hockey League. He had been up on a recall. The Sabres had recalled defenseman Zach Metza. The Habs had recalled defenseman Mark Del Gaizo. The Calgary Flames had recalled Dryden Hunt and Sam Morton. And the Toronto Maple Leafs also added Brandon Carlo to injured reserve, retroactive to November the 13th. Now, we know he missed the last game. We weren't sure what his status was going to be moving forward, but now we know he's gone to IR, so he's going to miss a little bit of time here. And then Jacob Quillen has been recalled, to take that roster spot in the short term. And then Taylor McCarr of the Avalanche, who's been going up and down every few days here lately, is returned back to the American Hockey League after getting in another recall just here the day before. Now, as I mentioned, a bunch of trade rumors around the NHL. Lots of teams that are looking to possibly do stuff, but like I said, there's still a lot of teams undecided if they're buyers, sellers, where things are heading. They haven't quite, sealed their fate for their season yet. But a couple of notes from Jeff Merrick. One on Nashville Predators player Steven Stamkos. Of course, we know Stamkos has had a awesome career, former first overall pick, holder of many Lightning records, multiple time Stanley Cup champion, absolute, like I said, stud throughout his career. He's definitely slowing down a bit. I think that's fair to say. But still, I think in the right scenario, in a rejuvenated team, maybe change of scenery, I can see how it could get him going again. Things have not worked out in Nashville. Now, again, like we said before, Stamkos is at a different stage of his career. He's got a young family. There's some people that said they're not sure if he's going to want to uproot them again after obviously staying in Tampa for a long time, then going to Nashville. Is he going to want to do that again so soon? We don't know. But according to Jeff Merrick, teams like the Montreal Canadiens and the Vancouver Canucks are definitely teams that are in that conversation around Stamkos. At the very least, have checked in with the Nashville Predators and are internally debating if this is a player they should heavily pursue or not. Of course, he was a longtime centerman. I think most people view him as a winger at this stage of his career. But could he play a little bit of center in a pinch? Yeah, probably. Probably not your spot you want to put him at, longer term. But, he's a guy that's a proven goal scorer. It's one of the hardest things, if not the hardest thing to do in the NHL, is to score. And he's done it with the best of them. So if Nashville's willing to eat some money on that contract, which you have to think they would have to do to some degree to move him. Nobody's taking Stamkos at $8 million. But at $5 million or 5.5, different story. I think there would be a lot more interest. They might not get a ton of assets back, but it'd be more of a cap dump scenario with something coming back to Nashville for sure. So, we'll see what happens. Obviously, Stamkos has some say. They're going to want to find the right deal, something he's happy with if it does happen. But according to Merrick, Canucks and Habs definitely interested for sure and are monitoring that and having internal discussions. But Merrick also says that when it comes to the Nashville Predators, the name that he's kind of really intrigued about here more than anybody is Filip Forsberg. Of course, Forsberg, we know, is a competitive guy. He's had a great run there in Nashville, holds a lot of team records, signed a long-term lucrative deal just a couple years back, not that long ago. Would he be a player that may want to get into a more competitive situation? And really, is he going to be a player that a lot of teams would inquire on? I think a lot of teams would gladly take that Forsberg contract. I mean, really, if he can be a 30, 40 goal guy like he's been, why wouldn't you want that, right? You imagine a team that is, a piece or two away from being a real solid cup contender. He could be that player. Now, there was some talk, I know, about the Colorado Avalanche. If they would have lost Gabriel Landeskog a few years ago before he re-signed, apparently their plan B was to go after Forsberg. And of course, Landeskog was on long-term injury reserve for a couple of years. Again, I think they looked at Forsberg, but it was always a very tough deal to really seriously pursue because of not knowing if Landeskog was going to make it back. That uncertainty for a long time, I think, kind of held things up and made it challenging, as we know, until they get late enough in the year to see, okay, is it possible that he's not coming back? But then even then, right, you'd have to use it more in a rental player because you're like, okay, we know Landy might not be back this year, but is he going to play next year? We hope he does. We don't want to tie up too much cap space so he can play. So it's a tough conversation to have. But Filip Forsberg, I think Merrick is definitely right. Probably the most intriguing piece. I mean, you get Ryan O'Reilly, who's obviously an interesting player, won a Stanley Cup. Yeah, I think he could be a very helpful, useful player to a lot of teams as well. Again, no trade protection, but Barry Trotz is going to want to do right by him, said he wouldn't move him to a scenario that he wasn't comfortable with. We had heard about O'Reilly having interest from Vancouver as well and not being crazy about that idea. We know he wasn't thrilled about going back to the Leafs either, so I'm not sure if O'Reilly moves on where he could end up. There's definitely a number of teams I think that would consider that. His contract's pretty good if he's playing up to his capabilities. So, but Forsberg definitely probably the most intriguing in a sense because of the contract, the long-term deal, right? So if a deal came through for Forsberg, it's not going to be a guy that they only have for a year or two, like you always usually get around the deadline. This is a long-term player joining that you can normally only get as a free agent, and now you're getting it as a trade piece. It's going to not be cheap either. So interesting for sure. Now Frank Saravalli also reporting that the Blues have very much made it clear that they very much want to shake things up. So combination of comments here from Saravalli and Dave Pagnotta at thefourthperiod.com. Frank saying that the Blues, like I said, made it clear they want to shake things up. There's a lot of things that they're willing to listen on. Pagnotta says that a couple of names to watch, Braden Shen, of course, being a very attractive piece for a lot of teams. He's going to be a player that is heavily pursued by a lot of teams. We know that based on what Friedman had said about Shen before, he said that he thinks that essentially Braden Shen last year was hesitant about moving on because he wasn't, I don't think, entirely convinced and sold that his team was truly out of it. He didn't want to bail on his team as a captain, especially if they could be in the mix, in the fight, and get into the playoffs. So that's an admirable quality as a leader of that team. And look what they ended up doing, right? I mean, they had a really strong second half. So it was probably wise by him to stick things out and to stick with it. But ultimately, things are feeling different this year, and Shen might feel differently as well. And looked at some different teams. We also heard that basically the main opportunity that the Leafs had of trying to get him last year was that he might be able to get a chance to play with his brother because they were in on both Shen brothers. So, I don't know that there's a lot of interest that way to go to Toronto, but again, we don't know exactly Braden Shen's wishes here, but we had heard before the Leafs and the Senators were a couple of teams linked to him. Obviously, the St. Louis Blues have a lot of other players as well. Jordan Kyrou's name, according to Dave Pagnotta, has kind of popped back up. He said ultimately, Kyrou's name got a lot of attention in the summertime. No trade clause kicks in, kind of calmed down for a bit. But now that the team is struggling where it's at, that his name has certainly resurfaced and talks have definitely resumed around his future. Now, of course, he's going to have to okay any deal. But like we said before, I do wonder if Kyrou would accept a trade, out of the St. Louis Blues. It might obviously depend on where he's going, but at the same time, we know that he seems to be the guy that gets singled out a lot when things aren't going well. And some guys just don't like, it's not really something they enjoy having happen to them. So, is he ready for a change? It does make you wonder. But between Shen and Kyrou, you get, Justin Falk's name is out there. I don't know about Binnington. I mean, I think there would definitely be interest for sure. But right now, Binnington and Hofer, neither one of them are really playing good for the Blues. So hard to say what the level of interest is going to be. Be curious to see if his regular season play somehow gets him off of Team Canada. But I consider their lack of depth at the position, I don't know, and I don't think that's going to happen. But we will see. But the Blues for sure, and the Predators are going to be. There's so many players between those two teams that are big names, big time contributors, and could be massive additions to a lot of other teams around the NHL. We'll have to wait and see what happens. And like I said, we'll see if Elliott's on to something here. Montreal looking for an inexpensive center. Could John Beecher of the Bruins be their guy? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.